Find a pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Welcome to the Aviatrix Book Review. I'm Liz Booker. My guest today is the author of 15 books, including 10 works of narrative nonfiction. She is director of Transatlantic Storytelling, an ongoing series of online workshops for writers here and abroad, and an affiliate professor of storytelling and social change at the University of Washington. You can find her at her website, laurenkessler.com, and on her blog, Lauren Chronicles. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. So let's shift into writer mode. So I think I told you I've got my Aviatrix Book Club audience who read this book with me. So far, I have about 43 members in my writers group, and I totally anticipate that growing. And where we are working together, I mean, we have the range of experience in this group. We have women who have published multiple, like 10, 15 books like you have, some of which have been extremely successful, especially one particular, I'm a total fangirl of one of our members who is a YA author. And then everything to, people like me who are sort of, I'm working on my drafts, and I think I'll be ready to find an agent in the next year or so, but I have done a lot of work to get here. And all the way to I have a book idea and I think I want to write. And so where do I start? So we have the full range of writing experience, lots of aviation experience. I mean, you gave us a really good, solid foundation for how you came to writing what you write, but where did you go to school? How did you develop your writing? And how did you end up where you are now?
I knew I wanted to be a writer from when I was about 8 years old. I could never have articulated it. I certainly didn't articulate it this way when I was 8, but I had a moment when I was reading a book. And I was outside under a tree in the front of my parents' house. And it was the book, My Friend Flicka, which was a book written in the 1920s, I think. Yeah. And it's about a boy and a horse. Well, I'm a girl and I don't have a horse. And it takes place many thousands of miles away from where I live. My mother called, I'm sitting under the tree reading, and then my mother calls me for lunch. And I had this moment where I forgot where I was and who I was. And I actually got goosebumps just saying that again. And again, I didn't think this when I was 8. I didn't think of it in this way, but that experience of being able to create a seamless world that a stranger could inhabit and forget everything just caught me. So I think that's when I knew. Through high school, I was the news editor of my high school newspaper, and I was the literary editor of my high school yearbook. And there was some little literary prize that I won. I don't know for doing what, but I decided that I was interested in real life. So I thought I'd be a journalist. And there was at that time a comic called Brenda Star Reporter in the Sunday papers. And she was gorgeous with red hair. And she was a reporter. Her name was Brenda Starr, Starr, and Star Reporter. She traveled around the world and she had many adventures. And she had a boyfriend with an eye patch. That's the thing that got me. So I thought I want to be Brenda Star Reporter. That's the depth of my inspiration for journalism. It was not like I want to be Woodward and Bernstein. I want to save the world. It was like I want to travel the world and have a boyfriend with
an eye patch. That's so great.
So I went to Northwestern. I went to Medill School of Journalism, Northwestern, and I learned traditional journalism. And as I said before, I got a job as a news reporter, and I hated it. almost immediately. It was, again, quickly getting a little bit of information, pretending that you were in control of that and knew something, and then throwing it out there, and then moving on to something else. And it was very unsatisfying. It was very scary that people would be reading me and thinking they were learning something when I didn't really know anything. I was just quoting somebody who told me something. I didn't like that. And it also was not about telling a story at all. I mean, the reason that I loved writing was it was storytelling. So I never took a class or studied with anyone who taught me how I write. And it's not that they didn't exist. I mean, I don't think I knew they existed, but I learned it from reading other people. I learned it from reading some of the iconic storytelling journalism of the 1970s and 1980s, Joan Didion for one, Gay Talese, John McPhee, some of the sort of old school iconic people, and just seeing what they did and trying it out. So I quit the newspaper and I started, among other things, and going to school, I started writing magazine stories because that allowed me longer time and to develop at least a bit of the storytelling. And it became sort of a smaller jump from a magazine piece to a book. When I would write several of my books, the Alzheimer's, the Life Inside an Alzheimer's Place, which is not a depressing book, everybody. It actually is not a depressing book. That started with a story that I wrote for the LA Times Sunday magazine. And after I finished writing it, and I had spent probably 2 or 3 months researching it and writing it, which is a long time to spend on a magazine piece. You can't make any sort of living that way. I was also teaching. I thought that I had gotten it out of my system. I had learned what I wanted to learn. I had communicated what I wanted to communicate. Not true. It opened the door to the book. And the same thing with the book that I wrote that's called Stubborn Twig, which is about 3 generations of a Japanese family and the promise and the peril of becoming American. Started with the magazine piece. And I thought, okay, did it. And it just haunted me. I had to go more. So I had I want to say, the luxury of being able to do this because I had another income stream. I was teaching, and at that time, until very recently, I was teaching full-time and writing full-time, and 3 children. So this is not something, and I don't want to be admired for that at all. It's really not good. I didn't have any weekends. I worked every night. I worked on vacations. I took my computer with me everywhere. It's not good. So yes, I was productive. Yay, look at my great resume, but it was really not a healthy thing to do. I was able to, I'm never going to scale back on the writing because that's the core of me. So I was able to scale back on the teaching part. So I do teach a storytelling class. Now it's Zoom, but it was in person at the University of Washington. And I teach a number of smaller writing workshops through an organization in Europe. And so that became my teaching life, which is now maybe half time, much better. Yeah. So yeah, I think that answers your question. Yes.
It totally does. And actually, a lot of what you said will resonate with a lot of the women in aviation with a variety of backgrounds. I mean, you've got women who are flying for the airlines, who are gone for 1 or 2 weeks a month, women in the military like me, who left children at home to deploy. Yay me! I did so many great things in the military, but how off balance was my life? So I think we have all these theories about why women don't join us in aviation, about, oh, it's a hard life or it's a hard career. And I look at people like you. You're a writer and a teacher and trying to manage a home life and balance your life. I've got a girlfriend who is a senior manager in retail, and it's the same thing for her. She's working weekends, she's working nights. So the baffling part, I know this is a little off topic, but I'm going to just bring it back to us women in aviation. The baffling part is like, okay, all these other career fields have the same demands that our career field does. However, we're still only 7%. Women are still only 7% in aviation, and all these other career fields are flooded with women. So why, what is the stigma about joining us? It's hard everywhere, It's hard to work two jobs and be a housekeeper or, a variety of other career fields. So anyway, sorry, that was a little soapbox diversion. So yeah, you talked about your teaching, which I totally wanted to hear about, and in our emails, just this is for the writers in the Aviatrix writing group, and people who come to this. You have this experience of teaching writing to groups of people who come from other professional backgrounds or other life experiences, because you've taught writing in prisons. How do you approach that as a teacher? And if we were to team up with you, what would you be able to offer us as people who, specialize in flying, but who want to know more about writing?
Well, what you offer me, which is the dream of any teacher, is people who know discipline and people who know focus. And there's talent, yes, of course. Talent cannot be taught, right? But there's talent without discipline, without focus, and those people are the worst to work with. It's just impossible to work with people like that. So one of the reasons that I love working with people who are passionate about something other than writing is that passion comes from an intensity of interest and of focus. So you already bring to the table two incredible components of what it takes to be a writer. From my perspective, it's really different working with people who are relatively skilled in writing or have done a lot of writing, but don't know anything about writing books or book publishing. So I have taught just a class in what is the publishing world. I mean, when you decide that you want to be a flyer, for example, it's not just like learning how to operate this gigantic machine. It's what is the world of aviation? What is the commercial world? Who might I be working for, and what are those conditions like? So that's exactly what you do as a book writer. You don't just say, I have a great idea, I'll write a book. What's that world? So I think that's really important to be smart about the world of literary agents, the world of literary lawyers, the world of contracts, not from a deep lawyerly point of view, because that's why you have an agent, but what they are and what they do. Proposals, why do you need one? What does a proposal look like? What kind of market research can you do on your own to position your book? That's a whole area of teaching and a whole kind of workshop experience. And for people who already feel pretty good about their writing and just need to move that way. And then on the other end of it, there are people who have, who feel they have great stories to tell and who have the time, or will make the time, and the interest to tell those stories. What is a story? How do you plot a story? What does it take to make a character come alive on a page? How do you make a character come alive on a page? So that's the guts of it. as a writer. And I mean, there's probably, yeah, there are people who teach. I've never taught something very specific like this, but there are whole books about writing a proposal, what goes into writing a proposal. And then there's just the one-on-one. Like I have, because I'm a writer myself, I don't take on a lot of, I don't mentor a lot of people at once, but those that I do, there's a one-on-one, like, okay, tell me what you're thinking. Let's brainstorm this. Let's make a map of it. Let's put, a frame around it, and then start focusing somewhere. So you can also work one-on-one with people as a project moves through its phases.
So in our group, I mean, we have honestly, we have every genre represented for every age group. I mean, like we've got, historical fiction, narrative nonfiction like you do. We have mystery writers. We have thriller writers. I'm a YA writer, realistic YA fiction. So you've got like the whole romance, everything. But our common thread is that we are either in aviation or we are writing about women in aviation. So that's what's holding this group together. And we've got that passion and that discipline, like you talked about. But a big portion of our group, especially right now where we are in our history, are coming to a place in their lives where they've had a full career and they are writing, they have published, or they're thinking about memoir. And I like I said before, I read your book on writing, The Right Path. I loved it. I mean, I literally read that in one sitting. So all you writers out there, just pick it up. And it's not simple. It's very dense, but it's concise and it's very readable. You really kind of delved a little bit into the memoir as opposed to narrative nonfiction. And so I'd love for you to just say a little bit more about that as a teaser for those who are thinking about it in terms of where it falls, in terms of fiction and nonfiction, and your thoughts about memoir.
It's an endlessly fascinating subject to me. Because I think that it is almost a genre by itself. I don't think that it's nonfiction. I don't think it's fiction. But it obviously has parts of both. So you're not making it up because it's your life or a part. If it was your life, it would be a biography. A memoir is different than a biography. So memoir is a discrete sphere of your life, a discrete experience, a discrete set of years or whatever, not I was born here and this is my trajectory. But it is filtered through you. It is what you remember. And especially, like, let's say you're remembering the first time that you were up in the air. And it was, I don't know, you were 5 years old and you were on a commercial air flight and you were looking out the window and you thought, the clouds from the other side. I love this. I want to see this every day. Well, maybe you thought that when you were 5, or maybe, who knows what you thought. But now you think, as a 5-year-old, I would have thought that, and it sure makes a good story. So this is why our memory is wonderful. It plays tricks on us. It wants to create stories that make sense. It wants us to be the hero of our story. Not an unflawed hero, because nobody likes an unflawed hero, and none of us are anyway. So memoir is, it is factual in the sense that you are real and things happen to you that could be independently verified. You did go here. You did fly here. this did happen. But how you process it and the story you tell around it is fictionalized, to just use that word. So it is I think it's an incredibly lovely challenge to have. And I support it to the extent that people understand that they are not writing, I'm just writing the facts, this is what happened, because it's filtered through your memory. And they don't, I think that memoir writers who present their work as nonfiction and it is marketed as nonfiction, those are the ones that get into trouble. Those are the big news stories we read about somebody who says, well, I was in that person's life and that never happened. Or, I mean, books that are pulled, like big selling books that are pulled from Amazon or the bookstores because, of that. So as long as we recognize that it is kind of this lovely, meshing of two worlds, and we honor both of those, and we are honest and transparent with our readers in an author's note, for example, or in just the language that we use in telling a story. This is how I remembered it, for example, as opposed to this is what happened. So I've thought a lot about memoir. I've never really written memoir, but I have read a lot of memoir.
That's really fascinating, and I'm going to share with you that we've read one memoir so far about a very difficult story of a pilot who had a very successful career and was trucking along, just killing it in her career, and then got into an abusive relationship, and that abusive relationship destroyed her career. And it's just a really interesting way that she and her editors and her publishers decided to tell that story. That was our first book club story. It's called A Chick in the Cockpit. But I'm actually going into another interview on Monday with a woman, and I'm going to ask her about this because this is really interesting. This woman grew up in a Mennonite community, and her father was excommunicated and shunned when she was 8 years old, and it was a national scandal. So she is telling a memoir, and she ultimately became an Air Force pilot and then an airline pilot. And she's telling this story because she was behind the scenes as a child, watching how this man kind of gaslighted the media and the court, and like gained sympathy in ways that, from her perspective, and I haven't read the book, but this is her telling me this, gained sympathy in ways that he did not deserve. I'm super interested in her case, especially. Most of the women who are writing with us are talking about their aviation lives, and yes, those are going to be the story from their perspective and their experience. But this one in particular, I want to know from her, like, what did you just write this from memory, or did you dig in to all of that media stuff? Did you dig into the court case? So that's an interesting mix of memoir when there's public record of events like that. I'm super interested.
Right. Or even just checking with somebody else in the right path. I write about memory, and I'm talking about a particular summer, if you remember this piece. And it's
I do.
So my brother and I are at summer camp together. It's a boy. The summer camps are next to each other, but they're boy and girl. And this is fairly recently, he tells me this story about how meaningful it was. This summer was very meaningful to him because he was very homesick, and he had this very detailed story that had a sense of place and a sense of time. And he was crying, and his counselor called me in. I went someplace and I comforted him, and this was very meaningful to him. And he has a strong, I didn't even remember that he was at summer camp. I was like 12 or 13, and I had my first crush, and the whole summer was about this guy, and me like getting my first kiss. And my little brother had a meltdown. And so here it is, my fact and his fact, his story and my story. So if I were going to write about that summer in my memoir, I would interview my brother, right? I would find out the other kids who were in my cabin and find out, like, not what did you think of me, but what did we do? What's your memories? Because that's the way I research things. If it only came from me, that would be an interesting story. Great. But it wouldn't be really how I would approach the telling of that moment in, the telling of that time in my life. So to your point, did she do research on the public documents? Did she talk to, I don't know if her mother was involved in this, but if the guy was married, he had a wife, and she probably has siblings, and there are other people in that community. But that's that would be my approach, because that's my nonfiction, head speaking.
Yeah, I think you're getting to something important in this, which is emotional experience, right? It's like for
Mhm.
me, so for me as a writer, as a military officer, I was in the military for 28 years. It has taken me several years to break out of my emotional shell, to be able to connect with my emotional self and be able to put it in my writing. And I think, maybe what we're getting at is that a memoir is more a connection to your emotional experience as a human being and how those particular experiences affected you emotionally, rather than the facts
Mhm.
of how they happened, and how somebody else experienced it emotionally, because they could have, like you just said, they were there at the same time, they had a whole different emotional experience. So that's been a real challenge for me to tap into myself. So I think about it a lot. I could talk to
Well,
you all night about writing. Before I let you go, though, because I want, like, there are so many things. Everybody read The Right Path if you're writing. It's easy to read, and there's a lot of, there are things that we know as writers, but then there's more depth there that isn't presented in the same way in other writing resources. So pick it up and take a read. Before we go, I would love if you could just offer any advice that you have to women who are not writers, who are thinking of starting a path to writing. What's your advice?
I'm going to tell you the secret of being a successful writer. Are you ready? It's one sentence. Apply the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. It really is about persistence. It is about believing that you have something to say. It is about learning your craft. But you get good at something by doing that something. I think there's 3 ways of getting good at something. You can go to school to get good at it. You can learn something. You can watch, or in this case, read, but like watch somebody, apprentice yourself to somebody, and you apprentice yourself to every writer that you read, right? If you read as a writer, so that's also another thing. You have to read as a reader, of course, but you read as a writer. How did she do that? How come I stayed up until 4 a.m. reading that when I know that I shouldn't have? Why did I throw that across the room? Why am I talking about it still 5 years later? So it's not just that was great, but what did I learn? And then doing it, right? Doing it. So it takes time, and it's hard because it's hard. It's not hard because because you're no good. It's hard because it's hard. And, for those of us who end up succeeding, we're glad, because if it wasn't hard, then everybody would be doing it. and I want to be special. So there you go. You said that was your last question, but everybody always says, and what are you working on now? So I get to take out that.
And what are you working on now?
Thank you so much. So I wrote this book called A Grip of Time, which is about the life you live when your entire life is lived in prison. And basically it was taught to me by the men that I have in the writers group. And after I finished writing that book, I generally jumped to a whole other subculture, a whole other subject, and I just couldn't leave this alone. And the reason I couldn't leave it alone is now I knew what incarcerated life was like. I mean, as much as a person could know I've never been incarcerated myself, but I spent a lot of time in prisons. So I knew what it was like. And then I read this statistic, and here's the statistic. Well, it's two of them. So 2.3 million people are incarcerated in the United States right now, men and women. 2.3 million, the most of anywhere in the world. 95% of those people get out at some point. And we think we are a country of second chances. We think that anybody can make it. What happens to those 600,000 people every year that come out? And I know what life they lived inside, and I know how ill prepared that life makes one. The kind of, the way that you can't make decisions for yourself, the way that you are punished for making decisions for yourself. Forgetting about guilt here and that we should incarcerate people who do bad things. That's not the point. The point is now they're out, and we want them to stay out. We don't want them to hurt us. We don't want them, but they have learned very little. And so I am, it's 2 years, 6 lives, and what happens. So I've been following 2 women and 4 men as they have left long-term incarceration, sometimes for really bad things like murder, and how they make it or don't make it in the world. And that's the book I'm working on right now.
Wow, Lauren, it's some deep stuff that you've been working on. All of your writing for social change. We emailed back and forth this week, and I was kind of sharing this project with you, and I knew about your work, but I mean, you don't know much about me or what I'm doing. And then when you wrote back and you said, oh, I would love to teach writing, especially writing for social change, which is what you're doing. And I was like, oh, yay, she gets me. Because I totally identify with what you're doing. I admire it. I respect you as a writer, and I'm so grateful for your time. And I want to spend more time with you. I want you to spend time with our writers, so we'll definitely work on that. Thank you so much for this interview.
Let's do that.
And thank you for your book. Thank you for this treasure for us. Seriously. It's going to live a long life.
Thank you for your interest, and also just thank you for being at a place that we shouldn't find out about women who do things after they die, only after they die, right? We should be on there and supporting and part of and celebrating the people who are working and moving today. And so I get that that's where you're at and where your members are at. So hooray, and anything I can do to help, please ask.
Wow, thanks for saying that. Okay, I'm gonna cry now. I'm gonna have to shut this off. Thank you for saying that.
Well, you should leave the crying part at the end.